the history of the paranormal. Not an awful lot of people nowadays look into the history of researchers that have gone before us and that. And sometimes that, you know, that can hinder us a little bit because we're looking at new ideas without sort of looking into some of the old ideas, the old concepts, or the old theories as such. And I just wanted to share a piece of film here. It's very, very old. It comes from George Meek. Now, George Meek was involved with the Spurcom along with a guy called William O'Neill. The Spurcom is a communication device that is based on frequencies rather than snippets of radio that we use nowadays with the conventional Spur box. Now, there's an awful lot of questions around Spurcom because when William O'Neill died, there was a voice changer, a voice box that some of these people that loses their voice use to communicate, and the sound seemed to be an awful lot like the Spurcom. But the other theory was that the Spurcom was trying the reason why William O'Neill was in possession of this voice box, this electronic voice box, was to compare and compare the voices coming out of the voice box and the Spurcom. So we're not talking about the Spurcom at the in this particular video. I want to give you an idea of what I picture of the paranormal. Not that it may be right or wrong, but when we don't know something, we have to picture something. Now, in George Meek's lectures and stuff like that, a lot of the time he talks about this is the fact. Now, that may set off alarm bells, and it did with me. But there is a few things, and there is many of those things that somehow kind of make sense. And this piece of film that I'm going to show you struck a chord with me in relation to communication outside the realm of our physical existence here on Earth, or whatever the communicators are. I'm not saying they're spirits, saying the communicators of an unknown source or origin. Now, if we are talking to the spirits of people that have passed on, why can't we talk to people from the Jurassic era or those kinds? Why don't we see apparitions of cavemen or dinosaurs or things like that? Those questions have been asked. This theory might answer some of that, if you know what I'm saying. And this is in relation to how many levels of existence outside our own consciousness. He does a lot of lectures about living beyond death, outside the human body. Where do we go? What is heaven? He does reference a lot of the Bible. One particular quote, "There are many rooms in my Father's house." That to him indicates that there's more than one level outside of the existence of the human consciousness. After we die, there is many levels, and we ascend those levels. We go up. We we kind of graduate towards certain levels, and our communication can only communicate with a certain amount of the lower levels. When a entity or a spirit ascends to a higher frequency or a higher level, we can no longer communicate with those entities. That's his kind of idea. But I'll play this piece of film and I'll talk about it afterwards.
First, where are the spirit worlds? They extend from this very room, where there are probably hundreds of spirit beings listening to this talk, to the farthest reaches of space. The lowest three ranges are referred to as the astral levels, then the mental causals, and then the celestial planes, and on out into the cosmos. But instead of imagining these spirit realms as layers, zones, or planes, it is more realistic and far more scientific to visualize them as different frequencies or wavelengths of energies, just as hundreds of invisible radio and TV signals are occupying this room at this moment.
Yeah. That's sometimes I explain the paranormal as possibly like that. It's like a radio where you are listening to a certain radio station and you change to another radio station and you're listening to something else. That doesn't mean that the radio station is not operating. The radio station that you previously listened to, those signals are still coming into your area to your radio. It's just you're changed to a different frequency. That's what he's trying to explain here. I'd be interested to know, see this dark line here, is that his concept of where we can communicate? Because he does mention that after a certain level we go outside of the possibility of communication outside these four levels. Now, some of you that might be familiar with some of my sessions, I often asked how many levels of existence are there, and you know, this has actually come from this piece of film. And when I ask this question, I get a number of different answers, but the common answer is actually 7 when I ask that question. And it's very interesting that we got, you know, 7 levels here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, I'm not saying this guy's right, but it does make some of it makes actual sense, because very often when you talk about paranormal apparitions or paranormal the experience of the paranormal, we don't see apparitions outside Elizabethan era or Edwardian area. We don't see dinosaurs running down the street, you know, or people from the Jurassic era, which could mean, now I'm not saying that this is all true or anything, but this could mean that those people or those living beings are in these upper levels here, where it is further from the earth plane, which means we won't see Jurassic people, apparitions from Jurassic people. It was a lot of the stories, a lot of the tales come from people from the 18, the 1700s and stuff like that. You don't generally hear about tales from people from thousands of years ago. You know, it's you know, I'm not saying this is true, but it sort of struck a chord where some of it actually does make some sense.
Second question, what categories of consciousness are involved? Nature spirits, the human line of evolution, non-human beings, angelic beings, celestial beings, dwellers on other planets, UFO crew members, intergalactic beings. The third question is, which of these 8 levels of intelligence have been encountered by telepathic channeling?
All of them?
Well, the answer is all of them. From nature spirits to intergalactic beings who live in other parts of our solar system. Fourth question was, do space or time pose barriers to instrumental communication or telepathic channeling? No, the spirit worlds are timeless. Serial time does not exist.
Right, this is this is starting to fry my brain, because I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, but I'd like to get an explanation why it's a definite no.
Space is no barrier. Recently, my octogenarian friend, Mrs. McNames, whose picture you saw a moment ago, typed out a chapter for a new book as rapidly as she telepathically heard the words. The words were dictated by a scientist living on the star Alioth.
Now you've lost me. Go on.
Located in the heavenly constellation known as Ursa Major, popularly called the Big Dipper. This star is so distant that if the message had come at the speed of light, it would have traveled at 660 million miles per hour, 24 hours a day, for 80 years. Science has no explanation as how this is possible. And fifth question, of what material or substance do these interpenetrating spirit worlds consist? Again,
you have to excuse the static and stuff. It's not me, it's actually the film itself. It's very old.
And science has no answer to this question. In our present state of ignorance, we can only say that it consists of what has traditionally been called ether. In our chart on the basic nature of man, we refer to it as a sea of consciousness. Time does not permit a detailed answer. Incidentally, current research has shown that this sea of consciousness can be tapped by devices which will, in the 21st century, provide limitless amounts of usable energy at any spot on the Earth, with none of the problems with fossil fuels. And in this case, the fuel itself will be free of cost, except for the machinery needed to tap the energy. The first...
That explains a UFO video that I watched a couple of days ago, where is this element, element 115 I think it's called, is used to power UFOs. It's very interesting. You have to remember this is 1970s or 1960s. I can't remember which, but you know, it's interesting, you know. Like, the reason why I look at some of these older stuff is a lot of these people really believe that they have the answer in that. Now, they may or may not, but at the same time, it's good to see what their point of view was at the time.
global conference on these so-called free energy devices took place in Switzerland 2 years ago. The third conference is scheduled later this year in the USA. Now let us resume our survey of evidence for survival of human consciousness. I held a press conference in the ballroom of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on Good Friday morning 11 years ago to announce to the medium our successful logging of more than 20 hours of communications with Dr. George Jeffries Mueller, who I have already introduced to you.
I think what he's referring to is the SPIRCOM device that some of you may or may not be familiar with. I seen the footage way back when I was actually in secondary school of William O'Neill communicating with the sky, and we actually, myself and a science teacher, tried to replicate the same environment results and that, to try and prove or disprove that the SPIRCOM was actually a reputable communication device for the paranormal, and it wasn't fully successful in our particular case. Yet we still done some experiments around the claims around Marcello Bacci, and we actually did get a few results there. Both within, we were also looking into EVPs. Does EVPs exist? Now, the science teacher already knew that EVPs exist because he actually did do EVPs. So, we were doing EVPs on wire recorders, tape recorders, putting tape recorders into Faraday tents, and they were properly grounded and stuff like that. So there was no outside communications that could interfere with the device or whatever and stuff like that. And direct radio voice, the direct radio was voice, that was really interesting, because the tuner from the radio was actually removed, and we still got response. It wasn't very much, and it took a long time, and when you're 16 and 17 you don't have an awful lot of patience. So I did do experiments at home, and then I lost interest, because you're 16, 17, you don't want to be sitting in your room listening to static all day. You want to be out on your bicycle, or you want to be out fishing and stuff like that. It's funny how this is all coming back now in my later years,
Then Jeanette and I took our 5th trip around the world and disseminated the news worldwide. Our goal was merely to stimulate further worldwide research by younger persons who were more qualified for such research than we were. As an aside, I might say history has shown it usually takes at least 25 years for a revolutionary advance to become commonly accepted. But that 1982 effort has paid off handsomely. Now, 11 years later, researchers are contacting the so-called dead via radio-like devices.
Yes, there was a lot of talk at the time, especially around TV screen static, and actually the conventional house phone, where communicators were communicating through those devices and that. And actually written speech or written text writing on computers and stuff like that is very interesting. When you're into ITC, you kind of have to still You may or may not agree with the person that's presenting their evidence forward, but there may be something in there that makes sense, if you know what I mean. And that's why, you know, the example I showed you about the different levels of existence that he believes in kind of does make sense in some ways, because we seem to communicate with people that have passed within the last couple of 100 years, but not anything further than that. And that would actually, you know, fit the narrative, if for want of a better word. It would explain something.
Video screens, telephone answering machines, and computer. In England, Ken Wilber has used several computers to talk with intelligences which use 15th and 16th century English. Serious research indicates the validity of these communications. In Germany and in the United States of America, there are now several hundred members in organizations researching what is called the electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP, using simple tape recorders. There are several researchers in Germany who have had prominent success with video screens, radio-like devices, and computers.
You can imagine back in those times, everyday human beings would have thought they were completely and utterly nuts. You know, in more modern times, people are more accepting of people investigating paranormal phenomenon. But even in the 70s and 80s, if you mentioned anything about doing anything like that, they would have thought you were fucking nuts.
Luxembourg, my research colleagues, Jules and Maggie Harsh-Fishback, have had the most spectacular results. Currently, they have almost daily use of the telephone answering machine for contacts with a woman scientist from a parallel universe. And periodic success with computer and video for persons who have made the transition during the last 10 to 100 or more years. When I was in Luxembourg in 1990, my 65th trip to Europe, I was hoping that Jeanette, as I said, my wife for 55 years, would communicate. She had made the transition to the spirit worlds 90 days earlier, on April 25, 1990. The president of the Swiss Parapsychology Society and I were working furiously.
1990. This film seems like it's from the 1960s, to be honest with you. He mentioned 1990, so it was after 1990 that this film was made. This is, unless it was edited like this. I would have liked to have seen the real video without these little, you know, interferences. Maybe they'd use that for copyright purposes or something, like to fool the copyright system. I don't know.
Especially Saturday and Sunday, helping to make some modifications in the apparatus, and did not have time for my personal research. However, at the very end of Sunday afternoon, when the computer was printing out the summary of our weekend collaboration with residents of the spirit world, the unexpected happened. The computer printer stopped. It had finished its task. But then it started up again. It indexed itself back to the lower left-hand corner and printed out, "Hello, sweetheart, Jeanette." Weekends later, via mental telepathy, Jeanette confirmed her presence in Luxembourg during this hectic weekend. Now I would like to share with you an even more dramatic example of computer contact with Jeanette through Luxembourg.
There's been many examples of this, but then again, you still have to have questions, if you know what I mean. because we weren't there, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, over the last number of years, I've heard a lot about printers printing out random stuff, computers, you know, printing, you know, writing out random stuff, telephone answering machines, which back in the day were kind of like tape recorders, telephone interference with voices, etc., etc. Can we, you know, can we boil it all down to an external physical electronic force or whatever interfering with these devices? I don't think in all cases if this is to be believed, if you know what I mean.
A contact which was followed within 4 hours in the USA by a confirming telepathic contact through her former nurse, Lori. On February 20, 1991, I sat at my desk holding the Luxembourg correspondence file in my hand as I prepared to write my friends in Luxembourg to ask if they had any news from Jeanette. At that moment, the telephone rang. It was a call from my colleagues, Jules and Maggie, in Luxembourg. With great excitement, they reported that they had just received via computer a message in German addressed to them. This was followed by a letter message in English from Jeanette to me. The computer printout had no spaces between the words. I will now read a condensed and slightly paraphrased version. It begins, "Dear GW, well, it seems that there are still people who do not believe in the contacts your friends here in Luxembourg are having. Hence, I will give you some personal details known only to you and Molly. Give Molly my warmest greetings. I miss her. Nobody can know how much. First story. 1987, end of April, our rental tenant, Debbie, called to say that her refrigerator was off. It must have been on a Thursday morning and had no connection with the storm the day before. At the close of her workday, she called again to say she was having more trouble. This time she had left her purse on the seat of the car of the lady with whom she had been riding. This lady lived quite far from Franklin, so Debbie asked to borrow our key to her place. My second story. On April the 29, 1987, Anne Valentine wrote a letter from California saying she had not received the so-called Magic of Living Forever booklets which she had ordered, but instead had received a box of Harlequin novels. Third story. John Lathrop shut off the electricity at our rental house to put in a new yard light. He wasn't down there very long, but charged $20 service in addition to $40 for the public bulb, for the bulbs plus tax. The charge seemed high. I might explain that my dear wife came of Scotch ancestry, and she was always very, very frugal, a talent which I appreciated very much over the half century that we were together.
He rambles on a bit. He could have skipped to the meat and the potatoes here, but I think he might get to it.
Jeanette continued on the computer printout. Don't try to explain this, honey. My never-ending love to you. I miss you so much, but I know we will be together. I have a big job to do here as a result of that idiot's war. Love forever, JDM. I might mention that Jeanette was serving as a guardian angel of love and kindness, receiving men and women and children victims of the Mideast War as they came out of the discharge into the so-called tunnels. And she reported they were coming in far larger numbers than indicated by the news media. Jeanette then addressed Maggie. Please, Maggie, forward this to George. He can be of great help to you all. Send my best wishes to Lori also. Thank you, Jeanette Duncan Meek. Well, I knew that examples 1 and 3 were totally factual, but I was at a loss as to number 2, relating to the shipment of books to California. I had had no contact with Anne Valentine in California in 2 years, so I telephoned and read the item to her. She laughed, recalling the unusual incident, and said, yes, Jeanette is 100% correct. Neither she nor I ever learned where that box of cheap love stories came from. And to add to the mystery, they were all used books. Well, in recalling these 3 highly evidential incidents, my companion for 55 years certainly planned and executed a remarkable personal message, one that leaves little room for a skeptic to doubt that the originator of this message via computer was other than Jeanette Duncan Meek. But the story continues. 4 hours later, Jeanette's former nurse and telepathic channel, Lori, got a signal and went into trance. I then say, Lori indicates she has an energy which would like to speak to me. If you come in the name of the Christ, welcome. Good afternoon, honey. Well, good afternoon to you, sweetheart. Have you received a message from Jules and Maggie Harsh-Fishback? I most certainly did, this afternoon, just 4 hours ago. Thank you for the wonderful message you brought through via computer in Luxembourg. Well, I just wanted to feel useful. I decided this was a good way to do it. Then, for the next 20 minutes, Jeanette and I utilized Lori's superb mental telepathy abilities to discuss the book Jeanette and I had been co-authoring for the past 5 months. As of now, we are only beginning to dimly comprehend the modus operandi of mental telepathy.
Right, he's going to explain all of this, which I didn't really look into it. I've heard of the crown chakras and all this kind of stuff, and crystals and all that kind of thing. Never really looked much into it.
We do, however, have reason to believe that most of the items pictured in this diagram play parts in the process. Items such as the crown and throat chakras, the pineal and pituitary glands, and so forth. But ignorance of the process itself has not prevented me from utilizing same. I now share with you another fascinating and true story. When Jeanette, at age 80, became terminally ill, I established a private nursing facility in our home. One of the 2 round-the-clock nurses turned out to be a superb psychic. Her mental telepathy capabilities equaled the very best of the psychically endowed persons I had uncovered in 2 decades of worldwide search for psychically gifted persons. Even if the nurse, Lori, was off duty and 10 miles away, she was not only telepathically tuned into Jeanette, but she could monitor the functioning of Jeanette's physical body and its processes.
Now, do I believe in psychic communication and stuff like that? In some ways I do. Yes, I'm very skeptical on YouTube, especially with psychics that try to put themselves out there as, you know, look at me, I'm special kind of thing. A lot of people that have abilities, you know, the genuine people would be the ones that would not make a song and dance about it, if you know what I mean. And I kind of understand some of it. Like, do you know if you go into somebody's house and they've just had, the couple in that house possibly had a confrontation just before you arrived at the house, and you can sense that there's something not right, and it's not by just looking at the people themselves. It seems to be the energy of the house or whatever. Or you randomly get up out of your chair to look out the window when somebody has just arrived at your house, and you subconsciously go to the window because somebody's arriving at your house. Now, if it happens once, it's a guess, but if it happens umpteen times, there's something, I believe, there, because very often, you know, when somebody arrives at my apartment building for me, I would get up and I would look out the window just as they were pulling up. Now, is our subconscious connected to each other? I don't know. And I can't say that I'm special in you know, sensing possibly that somebody's about to knock on my door or ring my doorbell or whatever. But there was many and many a times where I got up to the window when somebody arrived at my house. There was a friend of mine that I used to do this so often. He would say, how'd you know that I'm down at the door, opening the door just as they arrive? And he says, how'd you figure out I was arriving? Because I didn't tell you. I says, I don't know. You know? And I'm not saying that's special. We probably have some sort of connection telepathically in some sort of way, but we are dependent now on technology where some of our abilities are suppressed by the dependence on modern technology. I don't know. There was another time a friend of mine rang me at the middle of the night and says, are you okay? And I says, yeah. She says, sorry to ring you such late at night. I felt that there was something wrong, and I had to tell you, and I'm really sorry that I rang you so late at night. It was early hours of the morning, basically. It was after midnight or whatever. The next day I says to her, I says, you actually woke me up out of a horrible nightmare. Do you know, and was our subconscious connected because of our friendship? I just don't know. I can't explain these things. Science, I don't think, was going to be able to explain these things. But the human body, I do believe, has some abilities that are suppressed by our modern way of living. If we were living in a more natural environment, we probably would see more of those abilities being used. You know, I think I'm going to leave that for now, because I only wanted to bring up the concept of levels of existence and that. I didn't realise he was going to go on so much, and I know he's a slow talker and all the rest of it, but I just wanted to give you an idea of when I'm communicating, and we are communicating with communicators of an unknown source or origin, and a lot of us call it spirits. We're not 100% sure of that. Some communicators say that they are spirits, some say that they're not. But it does answer some of the question. It fits where paranormal events always seems to have apparitions of persons that have died within the last 200 years, say. Anything before that, we don't seem to have those kind of apparitions. We don't have apparitions of cavemen and Ice Age people and Stone Age people and stuff like that. It fits in that way. Whether he's right or not is another thing, but I just found it interesting. I'll talk to you soon, folks. Thanks for watching. I'll leave a link to the full video at the end of this one. Thank you.